This is my first time in England. I am playing at the Cambridge Open, a 9-round chess tournament. I am very excited to be presenting to you all recaps of the 9 games. This is the recap of game 1. My opponent in round 1 is a 70-year-old man called Roger de Coverley, and he opened with e4. Now, he's been playing the game of chess for over 40 years, and he had 30 years worth of games in his database. It was just mind-boggling trying to prepare against such an opponent who plays pretty much everything on move 1. e4 was the first move, and I had prepared against his re-Lopez. So after bishop b5, I actually did not go what I play online, which is f5, the Schliemann's gambit, and I go for a6. Kicking the bishop, very typical Morphy defense as it's called. Bishop a4 and now knight f6. Attacking this pawn, but not really because white simply castles here. This is old theory, you know, very, very classic. b5, bishop back to b3, and now I play bishop e7, aiming for development, and so on. Rook e1 is played, defending the pawn and also preparing things like c3, d4 to open up the center. I'm gonna go d6 here, opening up the wing for my potential bishop to go to e6 or to g4, and then c3 is played, and now I go castles. I had prepared all of this. I was pretty confident here, and I was expecting him to play h3 to prevent my bishop from going to g4 and pinning this bishop. Very, very nice, you know, bishop placement, but no. My opponent just goes d4 here. And now I'm out of book because I really expected h3. h3 is by far the main move here. So I'm thinking, and I just say, okay, so you're just giving me bishop g4. And now I'm actually threatening takes, let's say h3 is played. I'm actually threatening to take here. And if you take with the queen, I win a pawn. And if you don't, if you take with the pawn, well then you've just completely battered your kingside castle. So bishop g4, my opponent goes d5, taking off the pressure from d5, and now it doesn't really make sense to take because just queen takes and I have nothing. So I was deciding between two knight moves, knight b8 and knight a5. Knight b8 is actually very common in things here, actually. h3, preventing my bishop, and then I would go knight b8 eventually to go knight back to d7. This is called the Breyer defense, I believe. But this is a different line in chess, and so I was considering knight b8 strongly because it works in other lines, but actually knight a5 is the move here, and I looked at knight a5 really much. I really considered it, but I just thought after bishop c2, my knight can never land on a good square because it's always going to be kicked by b3, and otherwise this knight is so offside. But the engine prefers this. But I went knight b8, okay? Knight b8, h3 is played, kicking my bishop, I go back to h5, and now knight bd2. And now black has to come up with a plan. It's not that obvious what I do here. And I just don't know. Either I escalate my knight to c5, but then after when the bishop is back to c2, I get kicked with b4. I could do a queenside pawn storm. It's not that interesting. I'm a player who's very aggressive, who wants to, you know, make some interesting things happen on the board. That's kind of why I play chess, to be honest. And so I come up with something that's kind of subtle. I play h6. And try to figure out the plan here. h6 is a common happening in some closed Italians in which you create a pocket of air for your knight to go to h7, and then some nice things can happen. You can go knight g5 from this, bishop g5 if the position allows, or even step up with f5 here and create a pawn storm trying to open up the f-file for your rook. So my opponent goes knight f1, very typical re-Lopez and Italian knight maneuver, knight d2, knight f1, to go to g3 to kick my bishop. I go knight h7, pursuing my plan, and my opponent goes knight g3. I go back to g6. Apparently taking is the best move, says the engine, but I can't fathom giving up the bishop pair in this critical moment, and I think my bishop has a long-term goodness coming to my position. Okay, queen e2 is played here. I don't know why my opponent played queen e2. I go knight bd7, developing my knight. My knight is very flexible, can go to the king side, can go to the queen side. Knight f5 is played here, and the engine really likes this. Of course, I don't have the engine with me during the game. Why would I take off this knight? Because after knight hf6, the engine is in defensive mode and says, basically, you've erased white's attack. But this knight is not burdening me right now, so I just go with knight c5, kind of hindering the position of this bishop and placing a nice knight for myself in the center. And now I go with king h8. King h8 is a very deep move. You see, I want to go knight g5 as our plans intend, but here there's a nice move for white, which is knight takes e7 check. And after queen takes, now you can create some weaknesses because I don't have 3 defenders on g5. So knight takes, pawn takes is forced, if queen takes, GG's, and now queen g4 is what I calculated. And here, I have to defend this pawn, f6, h4. And just like I think I'm losing a pawn because if this pawn is pinned, I lose my bishop, and it looks completely over. So I go with king h8 so that if you take now, I will be able to take with check on g1 first. Bishop d2, really don't know why this was played. Maybe you're connecting your rooks, but it's just a bad, slow move in this Lopez. Something better like a4 should have been played in my opinion. I go knight g5 now, which is not the best move apparently. Apparently bishop takes, and this is still a bit better for white. White has the space, so the engine does prefer white. b4 is played. Again, if you take here, check, queen takes, and then queen takes, and I'm going for f5 things. So it's very, very nice. I love this. Before kicking my knight, I go back to d7. The engine prefers knight takes f3 first, but okay. a4 is now played, and now I have to really hone in to my skill here. What should I play here? The pressure is on b5. White will open up a file where I have not many pieces on the queen side, and I could be caught underprepared on this queen side. It is actually very bothering. So here, I really just like the plan that I have, and it's going about this bishop and its misplacement on the board. I go knight takes f3 check, queen takes, and now this bishop is undefended, and I go bishop g5. Attacking this bishop and forcing you to think and move with this bishop before you take this pawn. Also, the queen is off of e2, so this pawn is less attacked, which is kind of like I'm preventing my opponent's plans and I'm going along with my plans. I really love that in chess when I play like that. So bishop e3 is played, again, a loss of time. Like, I just love how my opponent is moving their bishop twice, and both times is like pretty bad moves, right? Pretty passive moves, shall I say. So now I take the bishop, rook takes, and now I go knight b6. I want to simply hop my knight to c4 and attack this rook. I think during the game I was pretty confident at this stage, even though it looks pretty scary for the white pieces if I'm being honest. But hey, I really like the future of this position. So rook e2 is played prophylactically against knight c4, but this rook is just so bad. So many slow moves by the white pieces just lets me infiltrate and do better things. So now I go queen g5, again an inaccurate move. The engine simply prefers a5 here to open up the file. I did consider this many times this game. It is a very interesting plan. Basically, you sack a pawn for the a file and you just have really good counter-attacking things. It's really, really an interesting idea. But I went queen g5. I wanted maybe to connect my rooks first before attempting to go a5. And so I could get a rook on this file and then a queen looking onto this king, and then we just get some things together. Or like queen c1 things with the rook, and then we battery on h1, things like this, right? And now I kind of trigger like a little weakness here, which is the start of everything in my opinion. I'm not threatening much. I don't think I'm threatening bishop takes, and I don't think I'm threatening bishop takes here, but after h4, here I can play queen f6. And now I have little threats. I'm threatening to take this knight and then take this pawn for free. So white must defend. g3, and now I go bishop h7, and I really, really like this move. Bishop h7 intends for a very sneaky, not sneaky, just a really hidden plan. Here, the obvious threat is that I'm threatening g6. And here, you need to go knight d4, and then we trade queens. And then I go like f5. So the plan is just to go f5 and open up that king side. But if you defend the queen, you have free mobility of your knight. But even then, this is what I saw YouTube. g6, attacking the knight, sacrificing a pawn on h6. And if you take my pawn with your knight, I can trade queens on f3 and now go for f5 anyways. And oopsie daisy, the knight is trapped. I'm not only threatening some double checks here, but I'm also threatening to catch your knight off guard with king g7, and the knight will be absolutely dead. So my opponent sees this. After king g2, g6, knight e3 is played, and I still have this plan. f5 is so nice. And although the engine will say it's completely equal in this position, look at the black pieces forming such an incredible attack, and then look at the passive and weak pieces in the white position doing absolutely nothing. Particularly, these rooks are unconnected or disconnected. This bishop is behind its pawn structure. It's not a strong bishop. This knight is kind of in defensive mode and certainly not attacking like 3 moves ago on f5. a5 is played here. I really like this move as the black pieces because this closes the position and all the counterplay that white has, and I can just go knight d7. This knight is very flexible. Knight f6 things, maybe knight c5 things in the very future, or maybe supporting c5 with this knight. My opponent goes knight f1 here, and the reason is out of fear. Sometimes people play things out of fear. Here the fear is, I want to go king g2 to get my king to shelter, but I can't because black has f4. Attacking this knight, and you can't delay the inevitable. When the knight moves, I have f3 check forking these two pieces. So my opponent prophylactically places their knight on f1 to prevent things like f4 and f3. The only problem is that this knight is absolutely terrible, and this is a waste of a move. Now I take on f4 with double check. A double check always forces a king move in chess. This is a fun fact for you. If the king took, I had some really spicy things prepared. Unfortunately, this didn't happen, but let's fantasize together. g5 check, discovered check, king e3, and then I saw g takes, and rook f4. And this is a super weak pawn. I would have probably won this game, which is really nice. My opponent goes king g2, and now I have to defend this pawn. I have a pawn up. I have to leverage this pawn up, either to trade it for another pawn for free or to just defend it to the ends of the world, and this becomes a strong pawn. For now, it's a very weak pawn, so I go knight f6. I considered g5 to defend this, but I thought that after takes, rook d2 to defend this, and this pawn will just eventually fall. I just didn't like this move order, so I went for knight f6. Knight e3 to defend this d5 pawn, so that's what knight f6 kind of did. It kind of defended and attacked. And now I go for g5. Okay, g5 is a bad move because it just opens this file on myself, self-incriminating. My opponent actually reacted badly to this. g5 can be an attacking move if you think of it this way. I'm threatening to take on h4 and open up the g file, but really white has complete control of this position here. My opponent goes takes, and now goes g4 to stop my pawn. Again, like my opponent responded out of fear because g4 from me is coming in. But g4 here, and a weakness is suddenly created. Now, my knight is attacking 2 pawns, and my opponent's knight is defending 2 pawns. So this is clearly a defensive piece, and my pieces are quite nice with a pawn up. So I was very, very happy here, and I'm looking for counterplay. I'm looking for a way to kind of win this game. I can play slow on the king side here, double rooks on this weak f2 pawn spotted on the board. I could also play bishop g6 and slowly build this out. But you see, from my perspective, I've been reading a super strong strategical book, and I thought I was all that and the king of the world. And here I gained maybe a bit too much confidence. I had the right strategic idea in mind, but the wrong execution because of calculation mistakes. So here, try to guess what I played. It's actually instructive if it did work. It is c6. And c6 is not a bad move in and of itself in the ideals of it all. I want to open up the c file on this weakness, but better would have been to actually play passive rook c8 and then c6 and then open up on c3. c6, d takes c6 is just the best way to respond. My idea is that I just want to cherry pick this pawn, and white really has difficulty defending it, can't defend it at all. And after takes here, c4 is what I missed. So c4 sacking a pawn, and now you have bishop a4, and actually white finds counterplay in this position, which is quite crazy given that I have 2 passed pawns here. Insane. So takes was not played, and my opponent, once again, not going into these dangerous lines, avoiding all of this. Rook d1 defending the pawn. And now I take, and I go for knight takes g4, right? Because the pawn is hanging and it creates counterattack. The only problem is black or white can find convincing counterplay here with knight c8, knight c7, also with rook h1 pinning my bishop and threatening some e4 things. Knight c7, I saw this move, I thought for a long time, and now I am in time pressure. I have 5 minutes left on the board, and I played rook a7, which is actually a blunder. It's a blunder considering the good move that I had here. Here I looked at this extensively, but I didn't like it for a simple variation. I have rook c8 here, and it's very, very beautiful. After knight takes, sacking a pawn, in quotation marks, the knight is completely trapped after rook c6. So that's not possible, but I feared this variation. And after knight e6, rook f6 attacking the knight because my rook was attacked, rook takes defending here, and after bishop g8 attacking this double time, I was just thinking of bishop defense, and eventually this rook is going to take on a6 and create some fierce counterplay along this a file. But the problem is, all the way down deep, I have a rook on c8 in my mind in this variation that is still on a8, and I forgot to see that rook c3, and I'm just attacking this bishop, and suddenly white has incredible difficulties holding this position as I'm holding the pin and creating immense counterplay here, threatening checkmate in 3 moves with rook h2. All the way back here, I see this counterplay and I look at rook a7, which is more attractive because down the line, this pawn is defended. That's what I was thinking. So I go bishop g8. It's really important here to not go rook e7 first, because now the white pieces get out of this pin with rook d8 check. The king will be blocked in front of with a bishop. That was bad English, but knight c5. And then the white pieces are out of the woods. I see no way that white is not super active and super strong in this position. So I have to go with bishop g8, bishop b3 to defend, and now I go with e3. You see, I could have gone with rook e7, but I spotted a tactic under time pressure from my opponent, which is rook takes e4. And although I'm threatening this knight and winning this knight is hanging itself. And I can't take on f2 because of king g3. And if I take here, rook takes g4 and my bishop is pinned. And this pawn will be hanging at the end, so it's really not safe. And so I go with e3 here. It doesn't really work, says the engine, but I really like what I came up with in this game. Resourcefulness, I have 1 minute on the clock. You can see it on the screen. f3, and now I go knight h6. And the idea is that if you take, I have a very nice little fork. So this helps me recalibrate my knight to f5 and defend this luscious, beautiful e3 pawn. My opponent goes rook d8, a move that I missed. Rook d8 pins my bishop and threatens knight takes g5 or just a knight move. And this is, yeah, it's not looking good, bruv. Also, rook takes g8 things are possible. If my knight is out of h6, I'm panicking a little bit and I go knight f5. I need to defend my e3 pawn. It's attacked. If this pawn falls, it's kind of off. Here, white has a winning move. Try to spot it. There's 2 winning moves. It's a winning idea. If you did spot it, pause the video. It's king g1 or rook e1, either or, and it's a good idea. King g1, anything to get on this file and try to checkmate my king, really, so that I'm forced out of this f5 square and this pawn will fall. It's a really interesting idea. This was missed in the game. My opponent had this syndrome in which you play quicker because your opponent is down on time. This is not a good approach in my experience from the Amsterdam Chess Open, season 3, I believe. So knight takes g5, a question mark here, and something that I had planned for. Knight takes g5 gives me this very nice move, which is rook g7, sliding my rook across the board and pinning this knight at once, defending my bishop also, because this was a discovered attack. And now my opponent liquidates. I go with rook g6. Okay, maybe I should have taken the bishop. But here, we slide into a very interesting endgame. This pawn is defended by my knight, and only by my knight, and the pawn will soon fall if my knight falls. Now, this bishop is kept on the board. Maybe I should have taken it with king takes, but the bishop is coming to b7, and it's like kind of hitting a6. And with 1 minute on the clock, I come up with this. Oh yeah, first of all, it's check. I loved this variation because the king can't go here because a fork, and so the king is forced to be cut off here, which is super instructive. The king is cut off, so white's arguable best piece in this position is the worst piece. The king here would be such a strong piece when you think about it. I activate my king as white cannot, so use the strengths that your opponents don't have. Bishop e4, and now I play a beautiful fake blunder, king f6. You see, king f6 takes off my rook g6 possibilities to defend the a6, and if bishop b7 here, a blunder, now I would have some beautiful things along the lines of knight g3. A resource I came up with during the game, I would have surely played this. If you take my pawn now, I have this nice, beautiful, beautiful fork. And after rook e1, I still go king f5. And you still can't take because of knight f1. If bishop takes, now I go king f4. And the idea is that I'm setting up a checkmating net. It's beautiful. Bishop b7 to defend this pawn. I'm threatening king takes and mate in 2. Now I have e4. Okay, would I have found this during the game? I don't know. It didn't happen, but this is very cute anyways. Here, I am kind of interfering the bishop's defense off of this pawn. And if pawn takes, I have king f3, threatening mate in 2. And if e5 check now, king f2, threatening mate in 1. And it's completely over. Insane variation. And if the bishop takes, I have knight takes, pawn takes, and then just king f3. And this pawn is too strong to be stopped. And this king is too weak to not be mated. So that would have been a crazy variation. This is the kind of idea I have planned with king f6 with 34 seconds on the clock. My opponent takes and just takes the pawn. And now we get into a completely drawn endgame, says the engine though. This is still convertible for the black pieces. In fact, if anybody has chances here, it's black because of this cutoff king that is on the side of the board. And here, I proceed to grind my opponent as I was grinded in Sevilla last round. And now we're just massaging the position. King f4, attacking this rook. A little bit of maneuvering. King g3. This king is in the corner, king g1. My king is gaining some nice ground. The problem is I can't really fetch this pawn easily because rook d5 things. Actually, do I have this? Oh, if I go back, do I have this? Oh, if I go this, there's rook d6. So there was always that during the game. And so now we played like the same moves, not threefold, not letting my opponent draw this. And now finally I give up the d6 square. And basically, I'm trading this pawn for this pawn. In other words, I'm saying to my opponent, my pawn on e5 is so strong, I'll give you a protected pass pawn on a5 in exchange for just letting this pawn be free on the e-file. So rook d6, my opponent takes it, king takes, and this is still a draw. But here, I'm just slowly progressing my position, putting this king offside. I'm repeating moves here to just gain a little time on the clock because I'm so backed up against the wall. King h2, and now I go rook a1, blocking this pawn in its tracks, and my pawn is going to queen. Rook f6, king e2. Again, just slowly progressing my position. My opponent gives the c3 pawn, but I let the pawn go up one square further, and this is still a draw, but I'm still, little by little, progressing my position until YouTube, my opponent has to find one move on this board, and if they don't, it's completely winning for the black pieces. That move is rook d7, but it's hard to find just a check move out of nowhere. It's more of an idea. The idea is that this king takes up all the squares of my king for me to deliver a promotion and defended by my king. So after check, forcing my king out, if my king stays with this pawn, there's no, just rook e7. Like there's no progress for the black pieces. But if king c2, and now my king is outside from the pawn protection, king f2. And now I would have to try to convert and take this pawn up, and this would be more of a draw. But here, after e2, my opponent played this complete terrible blunder, king f2. And this allows me to play a soft, brilliant move. Try to find it. Comment the solution if you do find it. Rook takes a7. Here, I am sacrificing my rook. I'm saying it's a weak, brilliant move because it's quite obvious that if you take my rook, I queen this with check and I win. This sack allows you to take here and probably forces you to take here, and now I can just go gather this pawn without the headache of white having a pass pawn on a7. So king c3, rook a4, the fastest way to get here. I was not sure about this during the game, but other slow ways can give white some chances. So we just go gather this pawn here, and now rook a3, super good technique, forcing the rook off of this rank so that my king can pass through and my pawn can pass through, otherwise I can't progress. The rook goes back, and now this is the key move of the game, W or L move in the chat. I went rook d3, cutting off this king here, and this is the move that marks the win for me. Now the king cannot progress, and let me tell you, YouTube, if the king gets to b1, this is a draw in chess. So preventing this king to come to b1 prophylactically is so nice. After rook c1, it really doesn't matter if you're blocking my king, I can still progress, and yes, I'm keeping the locks on this king, forbidding it to pass. And if you try to put a rook here, I'm just gonna trade and my pawn is gonna queen. And so now I just progress until the very end. And here, this is so nice. I don't even have to do the bridge endgame in chess. Rook a7 is just fine here. Rook a7 is so nice. And just giving myself a square for my king. And the king is far enough where white really can't defend this position. King d2 is played. And 2 moves later, after king a1, you cannot stop this promotion, and if you try to, it is a king and rook endgame, completely winning, and that marks round 1. Round 2, I'm paired against a 1600. After beating an 1800, I'm paired against a 1600. Something is wrong there, but it is what it is. Sometimes the pairings mess with you. I'm paired against a kid born in 2010 pairing. Ugh. Anyways, see you for round 2.